Mad Max, the original, is probably the most famous example of the slow apocalypse. There's no single catastrophic event like a nuclear war, a plague, or asteroid impact that destroys society. It just crumbles apart. All the social structures of the modern world are still in place. The police still arrest people, the government is still around, people go to work so they can pay their bills. But none of it works like it used to, and no one believes in it anymore. Crime is rampant and life is cheap. There's no hope for the future, only inertia carrying familiar forms forward for another day. Mad Max shows us this from the perspective of a cop in Australia. But it's interesting to consider this kind of slow collapse from other viewpoints, as many other films have done. For example, the 2014 film The Rover, which in many ways is average Joe Mad Max. He's not a streetwise cop, he drives a rundown four-door sedan, not a souped-up police interceptor. He's not a hero or a villain, he's just a regular guy that has to do some highly irregular things in a world where freight trains need armed guards and the government forces are just one competing gang among many in a world gone to shit. The Rover is bleak. A more comprehensive case that I find particularly interesting is Children of Men, incidentally one of the rare examples of the movie being better than the book it was based on, in my opinion. Children of Men captures this through its premise of global human infertility. It's a world where no babies have been born for almost 20 years, a world with an expiration date on it. And deep down, everyone knows that nothing they do really matters. No one has a legacy because no one's going to be around. Or perhaps that makes everything we do that much more important. It's a question one must ask throughout the story. So the film begins with Theo, a government functionary. Theo gets his morning coffee, having to push through a crowd of gawkers watching a news report about the youngest person in the world getting killed.
Baby Diego, come on, the guy was a wanker.
Yeah, but he was the youngest wanker on earth.
Theo leaves with his coffee and walks a ways down a garbage-strewn London street when a bomb goes off in the shop, and that's our introduction to the world. Also, the entire sequence is a single continuous take. This film does that a lot. It definitely has an element of filmmakers showing off for other filmmakers, but it lends it a sense of immediacy that carries through whether you consciously catch it or not. In this story, Britain is still a functioning country, one of the few. It has an organized army and police force. It has the resources to conduct complex overseas operations like recovering works of art from continental Europe. And it's a country with borders and a major illegal immigration problem. It seems like most of what the police do is catch migrants and send them to detainment camps, which are really just big chunks of land, like the entire town of Bexhill, that they fence in and mostly leave alone except for making sure no one gets out. It's a country trying very hard to pretend that they aren't staring extinction in the face. Far more than Mad Max or The Rover, this world knows it's in the last generation. In both the film and book versions of Children of Men, the story revolves around a single pregnant woman, but that almost makes it more bleak. A vision not of humanity's end as communities of old people waiting to see who goes last, but a world with a tiny handful of young people, alone, too widely separated to ever find each other, witnessing the end of mankind's story with no one to tell. Some face this by embracing a quest to preserve something of the dying world, for example, the Ark of the Arts. Others turn to an ideology of radical equality, inviting everyone into their little island of civilization in a spirit of peace and brotherhood, though through means that are not as peaceful as they like to claim.
We don't bomb.
That was the government. That's what they do to spread the fear.
What about Liverpool?
After Liverpool, we stopped bombing. We started speaking to the people.
Still others turn to eschatological religious movements, either in a display of self-flagellation to repent of mankind's sins or embracing the end of days. And of course, some still cling to hope for the future.
So, Human Project is having this dinner, and all the wisest men in the world are there.
Human Project? Why do people believe this crap?
In the film, Julia cajoles Theo, who is her ex-husband and apparently something of a beta, to run an errand for her in the form of delivering a pregnant immigrant woman to a group calling itself the Human Project, that may or may not even exist. Julia is interesting in this iteration, competent except for a notable blind spot, and she dies in the first act. In the book, it's Julia that's pregnant. She has no past connection to Theo, and she's... All the men in the story seem to be in love with her, but I found her to be tedious. But the common thread is that the possibility of a single child being born prompts people to do desperate and irrational things chasing this slim hope for a future. Meanwhile, the world is crumbling around them and no one cares enough to do anything about it. It's hope without preparation, or rather, an illusion of hope that no one believes in enough to prepare for it as a real possibility. The image of social decay and mass sterility brings to mind another example that gives a different perspective on this kind of crumbling world. The Prayer of the Rollerboys, released in 1990, tells the story of a street gang in Los Angeles during a slow collapse. It's a bunch of young guys that got together into a sort of surrogate family, and they all wear these trench coats and race around the city on rollerblades. The United States has faced a debt implosion. Foreign investors foreclosed on what they could, and an entire generation found themselves kicked out of their homes, often orphaned, and living in massive homeless camps that are in practice just open-air prisons. Naturally, these discarded kids form into gangs, often along ethno-cultural lines, and the Rollerboys are no different.
All right, look, you're hurting people. Besides, look, the Rollerboys are racist.
Yeah, but it's kind of subdued. Not a pillar of their identity so much as just an assumption. The other gangs are ethnically sorted too. They're a brotherhood of young men bound together by an ideal of strength, wealth, dominance. Sort of a Chadocracy, you might say, if you can look past the perm.
Rollerboys aren't just another gang. They own buildings, factories, foreign investments.
They also give young boys a sense of belonging. They have charity and outreach programs for the kids of the community, all of which is tied to the drug trade that they dominate with a concoction they call mist.
The Chinese engineered this drug to pacify their population. It cost me a bundle to get the franchise in this town. See, they supply the ingredients.
They widely distribute it, but Rollerboys themselves and their child couriers are strictly forbidden from misting. They're also very angry at the world they've inherited, a gutted, broke America. And they want a better world. They're patriots in their own warped way.
Alien races foreclosed on our nation while we were locked in homeless camps. Helped the white army win back our homeland.
Their leader, Gary Lee, has a plan for how to achieve that, centered around what the Rollerboys call the Day of the Rope.
Day of the rope! Day of the rope! Day of the rope! Day of the rope! Day of the rope!
And combating this criminal syndicate with its army of well-armed fighting-age men and vast overseas investment portfolio is a broken-down, resource-strapped police department that Max would find achingly familiar.
Can't even afford to buy uniforms for half my officers.
The police approach the Rollerboys like a drug cartel, with honest cops trying to take them down and some corrupt popo trying to muscle in. But the whole drug distribution project isn't motivated primarily by financial goals, but by ideological ones.
You ever wonder why Gary Lee doesn't want any of the Rollerboys to do the mist?
No, what are you talking about?
You do want to have little Rollerboys one day, don't you, Griff? It's the final solution. Day of the rope, day of the rope. Get it, Griff? Eliminate the weak. We having fun yet? Huh?
Genocide is so much easier when they line up to do it to themselves. The obvious flaw with this plan is that if American assets are owned by foreigners, those foreigners must be doing better than we are, probably a lot better if they're hoovering up assets. Sterilizing vast swaths of the population doesn't jive with a real economic recovery. You need people to grow food and make things. But young men don't always make great decisions. Is this where the dad advice goes? Well, don't look at me. Rollerboys certainly has a good dose of early 90s cheese, but it's interesting in that it's told from the perspective of people too young to remember the world any other way. The other films mentioned here follow adults who have experienced the pre-collapse world. The Rollerboys were born into it, inheriting a mess and deeply resentful about it. In some ways, it's the distilled essence of one of the themes in every post-apocalyptic story. The end of a world is the beginning of another, and what's normal is just a question of timing. These films all work with the common theme of a crumbling social order coupled with a declining population. More and more the people turn to tribalism instead of institutions, reverting to the base model HSAP operating system of forming small communities of people like us and competing violently against those not like us. But these films show things falling apart at different rates and in different ways.
Hey, box 9mm for my friend here.
While Rollerboys depicts street gangs transforming into pseudo-states that control territory, provide services, and engage in trade on the international level while the actual government appears to be treating every problem like a criminal problem, Mad Max and the Rover show us a steadier all-around decline, though through narrower slices of their worlds. It's easy to project forward to the Road Warrior from either of those examples. Children of Men shows us perhaps the most believable iteration, though. The state goes to great lengths to project the appearance of power. They round up illegal immigrants and detain them in the streets of London under armed guards. They run propaganda pieces on the buses and street-side screens. All of it coming across less like a viable effort to solve problems and more like it's all for show. A way of shouting, "We're still here," to a population that would otherwise quickly lose the last shred of faith, stop going to work, and leave the dying institutions with nothing to feed on. And the people really want to believe. The first thing I see is the piles of trash all over. But look at them. They're desperately trying to not see it. Getting my paper, going to work, I don't smell rotting garbage at all. It's an element that's present in these films and the entire genre, but Children of Men is almost about it. They all acknowledge that a functioning civil society isn't primarily about laws and institutions, buildings and rules, and people in suits with job titles. Most of it is in our heads. It's a story we collectively tell ourselves. But that story, that faith, doesn't collapse all at once or evenly. In Children of Men, the army and police remain organized and fairly well equipped, but no one picks up the trash. The belief in the militaristic aspect of the state persists, but the service side of it is gone. At the end of Rollerboys, the gang leader Gary Lee is in prison, but he's still running his criminal enterprise from inside his cell, complete with visits from lawyers and accountants working to keep his books in order and track down his enemies.
You're the boss, Gary Lee.
Enough of the society still believes in money, stock options, deeds to property, even as the streets are taken over by gangs and the law is just an empty word clung to by a dying tribe. But what's the appeal? Why are these kinds of stories told generation after generation? Part of it, obviously, is that it's an easy way to give a character obstacles, but I think part of it is that it's so close. It's acknowledgement that civilization is fragile. We all know this on some level, the old "we're 9 missed meals from chaos" thing. Normalcy bias usually helps us push that to the background, but it's always there. The prospect of things falling apart is scary, but also a little exciting, because civilization is kind of like a big comfy chair in a cage. It's nice to sit there, a cold brew in the cup holder, and plate of food close at hand, but there's always a little resentment over the cage, the boxing in that keeps us in our place. Escaping the cage has a certain appeal, even if it means leaving the comfort behind. And the prospect of facing that is close enough to contemplate in detail, but far enough away that we don't really worry about it, even if perhaps we should pay more attention to the possibilities. I'll leave with a scenario from the recent past. Imagine yourself in 1990, a Soviet citizen living in a city in the southwest of Russia, and some damn fool starts insisting that in just a few short years you'll be living in an apocalyptic wasteland and you need to prepare or get out. As much as you might sometimes relish the idea of the Soviet bureaucracy being out of the way, you don't pay it much heed. Crazy talk. Now it's 1995 and you're still in Grozny. The Soviet Union is a memory, almost everyone you grew up with is dead, the city is a vast field of rubble, you haven't eaten in 2 days, but you've been shot at repeatedly in that time. It should stand as a reminder that every once in a while things just fall apart. Films like these are, in part, a way of reminding ourselves of the danger of social collapse while simultaneously keeping the idea at a distance, a way of talking about scenarios without sounding paranoid. I think it's actually a healthy thing, being acutely aware of the possibility of social breakdown, but keeping it at the distance of fiction rather than obsessive planning. That said, store some food, because next time there's a supply chain break, it probably won't be toilet paper again. Really? We're going to call that dad advice? Okay.